right?
We're ready to start, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, we're ready to begin.
All right, welcome to council. It's great to see all the councilors here on the Zoom platform. Everyone seems to be getting used to this. This is something that communities are using across the country, if not around the world, using this kind of platform to hold virtual council meetings. So good afternoon and welcome to a regular meeting of Council and General Committee for Wednesday, May 20th, 2020. A lot of 20s there. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us of our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I will say that June is the next month we're coming into, and that is Indigenous Month here in our country. And it's also National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st. So we'll be marking that in our community as well. I do have a mayor's report. It's got some good detail in it. So I'm gonna take some time to go through it. And as you've seen the economy start to reopen this week, some of our city outdoor amenities reopened, and we continue to move into what will be a new norm for the next little while. Our CAO, Shelley Chemnitz, will share more details later in her report, and we'll hear more on the city's recovery efforts, but it's important to remember that this is an emerging recovery, both from an economic and health standpoint. That means while taking advantage of the provincial rules in terms of its easing, we are being mindful of the provincial directives and health directives, practicing physical distancing, not congregating in large numbers, and proper hand washing and hygiene, as well as what you saw today from the Prime Minister and the Premier, as well as the health experts, is wearing a mask when going in public is being referenced as a practice that we should be following. In addition, so if you're going onto the bus, if you're taking transit, if you're going into areas where there will be a high concentration of people, it's being encouraged that you wear a mask as well. We did see a slight increase in the numbers over the weekend, so we don't want people to slide back into their old habits. If you're out and about, today we heard again from the Provincial Ministry of Health, and it's in terms of what we're looking at for stores being to open. So they're going to be issuing some regulations around that as well. A lot of the retailers in our community have the curbside delivery. And I do want to acknowledge Pickup STC and our economic development team, who have a wonderful website that you can go to. And we're encouraging as many businesses that are doing the curbside pickup to be using Pickup STC as a means to get the public aware of your services that you're offering. We were noted that over Victoria Day, it is feeling like the new norm. And what we're looking at is we've been notified by Rotary. So Ribfest, as we know it, has been canceled this year. So that's another event that takes place in our downtown that will be absent. So we're going to start seeing things like this occur in our community throughout the summer and early fall. Last week, I had an opportunity to be on a call with the large urban mayors. It's part of LUMCO. And we had a great opportunity to talk with federal and provincial ministers about the economic realities facing our communities. And so through a lot of collaboration through the different municipalities, we're looking to make sure that the provincial and federal governments provide the relief for our communities so we don't have to put it back onto the taxpayers in municipalities across the province and across the country. This is important because we only have one real revenue tool, which is property taxes. The upper levels of government have different revenue levers that they can use. And so what we're asking for is making sure that the municipalities are going to be made whole as we get through this COVID-19 in our community. I will say that we have been working with our local MPs and MPPs very closely on matters related to COVID-19. There's a lot of alignment between the MPs, MPPs, and the cities related to these issues. In terms of just some clarification, so last week or through the weekend, you saw some media stories about the former GM property on Ontario Street. And we just want to provide some clarification around, there was some mixed messaging that came out through the media that the landowner is Lasani. The landowner is not Lasani. The Lasani was the company that was a prospective purchaser of the property. So there's been some miscommunication. I just want to clarify that because Lasani is a well-respected and community-minded company that has projects in communities across Niagara, Hamilton, and Haldimand. And so it's important that when we're looking at what the media is reporting, there's not a connection between who the current owners are versus who prospective owners are. And so, well, it's unfortunate that Lasani has made a decision to move away from this project. I think in the coming weeks and hopefully soon we'll have the CIP that'll be in front of us so we can have a community improvement program. So we can have a very deep discussion about where we want to provide those kind of resources in our community so that we don't miss out on another opportunity for that property to be redeveloped. Also want to say thank you to our volunteers here in City of St. Catharines. As a council, we weren't able to be and host a recognition dinner like we've done every year for, I think, the past 30 plus years. In the spirit of volunteerism that thrives in our city is what defines us as a compassionate city. And I'd like to congratulate Sarah Mateus Jimenez, the Margaret and Robin McLennan Youth Volunteer of the Year Award winner, for an outstanding example of the very ideals of volunteerism for youth in our community. She is a very bright light, and I just want to say congratulations to Sarah, as well as this year's Volunteer of the Year is Jess Boulay, a mother of 2 young girls, and she also works full-time, yet she manages to help lead the Shoebox Project for St. Catharines, putting in countless hours doing marketing, fundraising, social media, buying goods, assembling, inspecting, delivering shoeboxes. Over 1,000 were assembled and donated this year. She's also a coach for kids soccer at Club Roma, and she's a member of the parent council at Port Weller School. So you can see that Jess is the type of person that really tries to give back in our community in many different ways. And so as the Volunteer of the Year, just on behalf of council, just want to congratulate again Jess Boulay for her recognition. Also, thank you to the Performing Arts Center for bringing entertainment to our homes with the Niagara Performs virtual programs. You can tune in YouTube channel or Facebook, Sundays at 4, Thursdays at 7, to enjoy a great lineup of local talent. And if I've had an opportunity to tune in a number of times, it is great local talent that they're showcasing. So yet again, another different way that we're bringing arts to life through the digital platform as we get through the crisis in our community. Also want to say thank you to Electra for $85,000 donation to Niagara Health for the state-of-the-art sanitization machines that were being built here in Niagara by Court Holdings. Electra is a great example of another company that's stepping up to support our community and our healthcare sector. And I want to thank Councillor Harris for his involvement in getting that donation for our community. As well to Accenture, a company that's relocated into our downtown. They bought 800 of those hero shirts designed by Paul and Joe. To date, they've raised, Paul and Joe, who have designed the shirts and are selling them, they've raised over $30,000 for our healthcare system. So, you know, here's 2 individuals that at the very beginning put up their hand and asked how to make a difference. And they've done it through the t-shirt campaign. And I just want to say thank you to Accenture for buying 800 additional shirts. That's outstanding. Also want to thank a counselor around the Horseshoe. I want to acknowledge Councillor Cisco and his wife, Chrissy Sadowski, who took an idea to raise a bit of money for Niagara's Children's Center and turned it into a massive fundraiser. It started as a simple goal of $2,000 for a 40th birthday, and it bloomed into more than $12,000 in donations for life-changing work of the Niagara Children's Center. It's inspiring to see the way Chrissy rallied the community and the fun she had along the way, including shaving her and Councillor Cisco's heads at a challenge that saw Chrissy walk bike, and run for a combined total of 40 kilometers. That is an amazing tribute to our community. And that's the type of selflessness that we see during these kind of crises that face our community. So to Chrissy and to Councillor Cisco, thank you very much on behalf of our community for raising those dollars. In addition to that, In the Soil Arts Festival will be kicking off its online festival this week, starting on Friday. So it's the Soil Arts Festival. It's on, featuring over 20 digital experiences, beginning with a launch event on May 22nd, this Friday, continuing through till June 7th. So if you want more details to check out everything that's going on in the soil, go to inthesoil.on.ca. And finally, Ramadan ends this week, May 23rd. And to our Muslim brothers and sisters, we understand this has been a difficult Ramadan due to COVID-19. And we wish our Muslim community Eid Mubarak as you celebrate the end of a holy month of Ramadan. And I just want to say, I want to thank our staff as well. The call to prayer was played every day at the mosque on Geneva Street, and it was been played in the morning, during the day, and at night. And it was as a community as diverse as ours, I was very proud to hear the call to prayer when you got to go by the mosque on any one of those times. We got a lot coming up in June. I've already touched on Indigenous History Month and National Indigenous Day. We've also got Parks and Rec Month in June, Seniors Month in June, and Pride Week and Pride Month in June. It'll look a bit different here for Pride, and we're going to be celebrating it online. And it goes from May 29th to June 6th. And looking forward to see how we can do it in a virtual way as we celebrate the inclusivity of our community. So that's it for me. Over to the clerk. I apologize for taking so much time, but there was a lot to cover. And I'm going to go over to the clerk for the adoption of the agenda.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the following item has been added to Council Sugar Sync folder, which is an AMO Watch file for May 14th, 2020. And the following amendment is being made to your agenda today. Motion 11.1 regarding the next council meeting, which stated that the next council meeting would be at 4:30, has been changed to 3:30. And general agenda item 2.4, which is St. Catharines Cultural Investment Program, has been removed from today's agenda at the request of staff. And I will refer now to Director Christie to provide the reasoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We've asked for the report to be pulled from the agenda this afternoon. We've done a deeper dive at the whole SCIP process and allocations, and feel that it would be beneficial to present the SCIP information as part of the overall recovery report, which is coming to Council at the next meeting, including the program's impact to the city's financial position. And that's why we've asked for the report to be pulled.
I have no other amendments.
All right. Dave, Councillor Cisco, are you lifting something?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 2.3, with respect to the Budget Standing Committee, will be item 10.2 from that report.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And anything else being lifted? And I apologize, I'll be looking for your hands, but also I'll try and look I'll have the participants lift up and I'll see if your hands are lifted there. So I apologize if I'm looking around, trying to figure out where people are. Okay, moving the motion. Okay, moving the motion. Councillor Miller, you have the agenda as amended. You're moving that?
Okay. Presented by me, seconded by someone else, that the agenda, save and accept those things lifted, be approved.
Okay, Councillor Lilton, I believe you're moving that. Okay, we got the Merritt and mates that are moving that. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Any conflicts of interest for this meeting? Okay, seeing no conflicts of interest, adoption of the minutes. Councillor Dodge, you have the regular meeting of council Wednesday, May 6th.
Yes, I'll move those minutes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and your ward mate, Councillor Phillips, you're up. Yes, for seconding it.
Second,
Oh, yes, I'll second that. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. All in favor of those minutes? Hands up. Okay, it's carried. Thank you. Now we resolve in the general committee. The following item has been requested to move from consent to agenda. So we got the one lifted by Councillor Cisco, and that's under the consent agenda. So motion to move consent for the rest of the items that are on there. I have Councillor Phillips making that motion. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Townsend. Appreciate that. And I'll go to the clerk to call the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this afternoon's consent agenda consists of item 2.1, Engineering Facilities and Environmental Services Project P19-066-1, Environmental Assessment, Preliminary Design to Provide Secondary Access for Moffett Street, Award of Engineering Services. Item 2.2, Legal and Clerk Services, Office of the City Clerk, Council Correspondence. Item 2.3, Financial Management Services, Director, BSC Report, meeting of March 11, 2020, and meeting of April 27th, 2020, save and accept sub-item 10.2 from the meeting of March 11th. And that's your consent agenda. Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
yes,
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
And Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
Carried unanimously.
Okay, there's no planning meetings pursuant to the Planning Act. There's no special presentations. We now resolve in the general committee. And I call upon CAO Shelley Kemnitz to provide an update on staff's initiatives for COVID-19. Should be joined by Phil Christie, Director of Community Recreation and Cultural Services, and Brian York, Director of Economic Development and Government Relations, to provide an update on the city's recovery project team. Over to the CAO, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's discussion agenda includes a fourth update to Council regarding city services and activities during the COVID-19 pandemic. On a very positive note, our attentions are now focused on recovery planning. Our four objectives remain the same as previously reported on May 6th. Recovery remains the first objective, but always with the overriding necessity of assuring safety and security of the public and staff, as guided by health authorities in a manner that's fiscally responsible. So safety, guided by health authorities in a fiscally responsible manner, and that's the balance that we are working to achieve each day. While these 10 weeks have always been an exercise in balancing objectives, that necessity to balance is increasingly more important now. We're in the challenging position of keeping the big picture always in front of mind while still ensuring we're all attending to the minute details of safety and security. As the province begins the process of reopening, it's understandable that we now see many questions arising. When will we open X? How will we open Y? We understand this. Everyone is anxious to expand the options they have for physical activity and for socializing. It's been a long 10 weeks. Rest assured, staff is working through all the X's and Y's, and for some, we're comfortable coming to the conclusion of yes, we're ready to open that amenity or resume providing that service. For other items, the answer will be yes, we can, but it will need to be as we progress through to future stages over weeks and the coming summer season. And for others, we may reluctantly need to wait for more secure times. Staff is working to bring this comprehensive list, all the X's and Y's, to Council for our next meeting. Brian York and Phil Christie will shortly provide a presentation regarding our recovery work. Before they get started, I would like to quickly highlight the balance we're looking to achieve by using some specific examples. So 3 questions that we're working through when considering any municipal amenity or service. First, can we deliver it safely? Can we make it safe? Second, what's the process of delivering it safely, and what's the financial cost associated with that? Is it fiscally responsible to expend that cost? And third, how does this particular cost fit in the big picture of the recovery for our community? Will it serve a broad section of the community? Is it something that it's available from other partners? So I'd like to use a few examples just to illustrate the balance. So the question of, can we make it safe? So using the carousel as an example, it'd be very challenging to achieve even if we had unlimited resources to implement it. The large amount of hard surfaces, the enclosed space, the close quarters of the attraction, these considerations put the carousel strongly in the category of an amenity that we may have to wait for safer times. Looking at a service as an example, marriage licenses. Can we make the project or the process safe? Can we move most of the process online using virtual meeting technology? A portion needs to be completed in person. Can we limit that as much as possible to make it safe? We believe we can, and we have laid out a procedure to do that. Can we afford to do it with existing resources? We believe so. So we can deliver the service safely without expending extra resources. Then we look to, are there community requests? And yes, there have been a significant number. So in the coming week, we are working towards resumption of that municipal service. Stay tuned for that. Another example, our municipal golf course. The question of can it be safe is certainly yes. The province has authorized golf courses to open, and weeks ago we did determine that maintenance of the greens is essential given the amount of resources that would be needed should we have let them go. Then we look at fiscal responsibility. What more resources are needed to open? We would be expending extra costs and increasing our projected deficit higher, already a challenging number. So we need to review the golf course in the context of the community and other amenities that could now be opened. Is this an amenity which we wish to prioritize? Presently, there are other golf courses available, but they're at a higher cost to the consumer. So we need to consider the golf course in the larger context, and we'll present those considerations to council at the next meeting. Making an individual decision without considering the larger picture wouldn't be responsible from a staff perspective. Another example would be our beaches. They're not currently on the approved provincial list, so not an immediate opening, but a future consideration. Can they be made safe? Sure. What would be involved? Our teams need to plan and work towards that in advance of provincial approvals. Do we have the necessary resources now? We don't. It will mean increasing our negative financial consequences, but beaches are amenities that are available solely from municipal operations. Making them safe increase the cost of their operations beyond what they would normally be, but would that be a good investment for the community? This is something we need to balance out and present to council for their consideration. So safety, fiscal responsibility, and community impact, all important considerations often in conflict with each other. We are working through them and anticipate bringing this picture forward to council for our next meeting. So now I'll pass the presentation over to Brian and Phil. After they're finished, I do have some brief updates from the library and transit to share.
One of you is the recovery project team. So Phil and I will take you through a framework, some objectives, and the methodology we're using to move forward. So as you've heard, city staff continue to prioritize the development and implementation of a recovery framework. Nearly 30 members from across the corporation, including representatives from the library, transit, the Meridian Centre, and the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, are working through a number of phased recovery strategies with an overall goal of restoring service levels, protecting the health, safety, and well-being of our employees and residents, and finally strengthening the financial position of the corporation. Last month, the provincial government released a three-phase plan to reopen Ontario, beginning with phase 1, provided a targeted response aimed at support and relief, followed by phase 2, a gradual and staged restart of the economy. This is the phase we're currently in. And finally, phase 3, which is aimed at a long-term recovery for the community. Within phase 2, the province also included details regarding 3 separate stages for restarting the economy. Stage 1 allows for select workplaces to reopen and allows for some small gatherings. The second stage will see more workplaces and outdoor spaces open to the public, And finally, stage 3 would further relax restrictions on public gatherings and reopen all workplaces. So where are we at? On May 14th, the province announced the implementation of stage 1 of phase 2, the reopening of select workplaces and permitting some small gatherings. The process remains a gradual and responsible and evidence-based approach. So this slide better illustrates the list of stage 1 openings. This is mostly what our community has been experiencing. The underlying goal is to put the economy and our community back to work in a responsible, safe, and progressive manner with the resources that we have today. Stage 1 openings have a direct impact on city services. From construction and retail to our outdoor recreational amenities, city services are slowly being restored, again in a responsible manner. All construction has been permitted to resume and all essential workplaces limits have been lifted. Planning and building services are prepared for an increase in the demand for services related to inspections, permitting, and application coordination. Within the retail and other business sector, they are now too permitted to reopen, and our staff continue to support our local business community through the sharing of provincial regulations, the funding relief programs that have been announced, and encouraging safe social distancing, and starting to market the community for reopening efforts. And you'll learn more about this in the report next week or at next council. And finally, the city's outdoor spaces include some passive and active parks. Certain sports fields, including tennis courts, have started to reopen. While social distancing rules still apply, residents are now able to enjoy some of the outdoor amenities. I'll now pass it over to Phil Christie, Director of Recreation and Community Recreation and Cultural Services, to share some more details on the city's recovery framework. Phil?
Thanks, Brian. As Director York described, nearly 30 members from across the corporation are working through a number of phased recovery strategies with a goal of restoring service levels, ensure the health and safety and well-being of our employees and residents, and strengthening the financial position of the corporation. The model that the recovery planning team is working on identifies prioritized scenarios that the corporation will need to consider, identify desired outcomes to those scenarios, and specific deliverables to mitigate risk. The team continues to meet virtually using an online engagement platform with a defined focus on the following 3 pillars of recovery. The first pillar is economic, which focuses on the financial well-being of the city and its citizens. The second is organizational, which focuses on the operations necessary to provide services to citizens. And the third is health and wellness, which focuses on the physical and mental well-being of citizens and staff. This is an example of a scenario that has been identified and the necessary steps towards specific deliverables. Having representation from across our staff groups has been key to identifying deliverables which are relevant and meaningful. Each pillar group has identified scenarios which are focused on both external and internal points of view as the work of the recovery planning team seeks to address how the city moves forward while keeping residents and staff safe. In this example, you'll see that the scenario identified is one which deals with the continued health and safety of staff, and the health and wellness pillar group is working on this. There's no doubt that the other 2 pillar groups are also working on this scenario, and this gives us an opportunity to bring ideas from different perspectives together to come up with informed solutions. As the pillar groups work through their scenarios, specific deliverables will be categorized with a keen eye on whether or not we can deliver it safely, what's the process of delivering it safely, and its cost as part of the overall recovery of the community. The timing of the solutions will be identified based on these 3 categories, and short and long-term schedules will be presented for consideration and alignment with available resources. Our EFES team has already begun this work, and an example is shown on the next slide. We can share with you today that protective barriers have been installed at service counters at City Hall, the Lake Street Service Center, and the Victoria Lawn Cemetery. And as you can see from the graphic, the work will continue on to other areas as resources and materials are made available. So this example in particular has, if you can see, a physical barrier along with a modified counter design to allow for the transmission of documents underneath the glass. Here's another example of work currently being done. These are samples of signage that you'll be seeing at our facilities. What we are striving for is consistency in the look and messaging so that we can help to establish new norms. So the hope is to have this present in our facilities. The public can see them wherever they go, and they'll understand what they mean just by looking at them and seeing the same message throughout our facilities. Thank you, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. And there's a lot of information. I know I got Councillor Williamson with a virtual hand up. I just want to say thank you to the CAO, to Director York and Director Christie for providing that level of detail. And I'll go to Councillor Williamson and then Councillor Garcia.
Thank you. I'll just make a general comment. That is, I'm glad that we're charting a more independent course and not just falling in line with the loosening plans that the province has set in place. There's a lot of experts out there who are suggesting that without a lot more testing and contact tracing, we are headed into an uncertain situation. So I think it behooves us to not necessarily be overly cautious, but for us to be conscientious about this. And I agree that we need to follow a fact-based approach and listen to the public health experts who know what they're talking about. Thank you. And thanks for the work that you folks are doing.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson, and well said. Agree with your comments as well. Councillor Garcia, then Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, thank you to staff like Councillor Williamson. I just had a quick question of Director Christie. I was looking at that sign and decals slide, and I was just wondering whether showing social distancing and then showing the arrows for 6 meters horizontally might be a bit confusing, and whether those arrows should be vertical. It seems to imply that your feet should be a meter or 6 feet apart.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I am going to ask Director Martuccio to comment on the final design of the signs. I do know that the 6 feet doesn't just imply in front of you and behind you, but it is actually around you. So certainly we can take that under advisement. And if there's time to make some changes to the signage and make it clearer, we can certainly look at that.
Thank you.
For you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the signs were, the designs were coordinated through our communications department as well. I guess it depends on the application that you're looking at. A lot of these signs will also be within our facilities at counters like PBS counter, where they actually are lining up adjacent to each other. So it's, as Director Phil Christie mentioned, it's just to indicate that 6 meters or 2 meters of space is required for proper social distancing.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, through you, no decision right now, but please consider whether it would be better than to have 2 arrow signs, one going up and one going across, so that it shows 6 feet all around. And by the way, Director Martuccio, your name is misspelled. I don't know if you caught that.
I did not, but Evan, I believe you spelled that name that way. So.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Garcia. Councillor Phillips.
Anyone on the recovery team, in regards to the golf course, do we have any idea as to when we plan on opening it? I'm sure there's, and I know that the private courses are open and they're very busy, and that's great, and they're doing great business. But there's probably people waiting for our course to be open too. So just to give the public an idea of, do we have a plan as to when the date that's going to open?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't currently have a date. We, as I had sort of indicated, or I had indicated in my opening remarks, that we want to consider it in the context of the whole city. So when we're looking at fiscally where we're going to spend our money, will it be a larger amount, a smaller amount for the golf course, and where will the greater need be? Where will more of the accommodations be? So we'd like to present that. Certainly it will be included for consideration at the June meeting. So it certainly would not be opening between now and the next meeting. till we have the context of the whole corporation to look at.
Okay, so it won't be open for 2 weeks. And as far as tennis nets, are they up now or on the road to being up for tennis and pickleball?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the tennis nets have been put up at places where we can allow free access, and the actual one location where we require a membership, we've actually locked those gates open so they're free for uses there as well.
Free for anyone's use.
That's correct. We just ask, sorry, we just ask that people be respectful when there's lots of people waiting to play, because there have been lines of people waiting to use the tennis courts.
Great. Thanks, Daryl. That's all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. I got Councillor Littleton and Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions about the golf course were answered. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Miller, you're up.
Yeah, just staying there. Can I guess maybe Phil or whoever answer how, if we're maintaining the course now, how that will change, how the costs we expect them to change if we open the course, because obviously right now we're missing out on the revenue, but we're still spending I assume an okay amount of money maintaining the course. Could you maybe explain, most for the public's benefit perhaps, how much we're saving by not having it open even though we're still maintaining?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have the exact number. Well, sorry, I don't have the exact cost in front of me with respect to what it's costing to be maintained, but it's not being maintained at the same level it would be maintained if the course was open. So we're doing basic cuts. We are cutting the greens and the tee boxes to keep them in shape. The main portion of what we're saving would be all the clubhouse staff, the marshals, all of those expenses, the expenses of renting electric carts, the expenses around all of opening up the facility. One of the things that has to be figured out with respect to the golf course is a cashless point of sale system. So there are some issues to be resolved and a cost associated with those issues before we can make the step of opening the course up.
So just to be clear, let's say in 2 weeks, staff come back with a plan and we say, okay, let's open up the course. We're not looking at being open the next day. Would that be fair to say? There's going to be some time between a decision, and because we got to hire staff and we got to rent carts and we got to do all these things, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Miller. Okay, do I see any other questions pertaining to this? Because the CAO would like to just wrap it up with the transit library comments as well.
Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to highlight the fact as council is aware, we've been working closely with library and transit to streamline their recovery process and work as a united front through this pandemic. Just a few comments from both of those organizations. As regards to the library, the provinces have now allowed libraries to offer pickup and delivery services. Our library team will be launching their pickup services on Monday, June 1st, and the service will be available at the Central Branch from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Saturday. The library will be issuing a media release with more specific details later this week. Our facilities team in EFES has been working with the library to ensure their facility is ready. Library has also been offering various virtual programming from home. Most recently, library launched a Learn from Home initiative to support educators, parents, and caregivers who may be struggling to teach their kids at home. The program is free and offers videos intended for kids from kindergarten to grade 3. It aligns with Ministry of Education curriculum and includes counting, literacy, and other concepts. From our Transit Commission, Transit has developed a plexiglass driver barrier that will be installed in all buses. The barrier has been reviewed in consultation with their union executive along with health and safety representatives. The fabrication and installation process will take a few weeks. This will be one of our first steps towards the return of front door boarding and fare collection. The bus capacity restrictions resulting from physical distancing requirements are very challenging for the transit industry. Currently, buses are restricted to 10 passengers to maintain safe distancing. As the economy reopens and ridership grows, increased capacity will be required. And over the past 8 weeks, the Commission has been messaging that transit is for essential trips only. With restrictions being eased and more businesses opening, this message is being removed from the buses as transit is a key part of our recovery. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I just want to thank Councillor Miller and Councillor Dodge. I know that they're on the Transit Commission. I think Transit's doing an outstanding job of reacting and pivoting as quickly as possible. And I've heard only good news about the transit and their drivers and the management and how they're managing this entire situation. So I just want to say thank you to the leadership there under Graham Morrison, as well for the libraries. I know Councillor Littleton and Councillor Williamson are on the board there. We've had an opportunity to talk to Executive Director Ken Sue, and again, I think they're doing an outstanding job managing a very challenging time and bringing their employees along with it. So looking for further information, looking forward to further information as the libraries open up as well. If I can ask the CAO just to, Councillor Phillips, got your hand up?
To the CAO, at our last Budget Standing Committee meeting, we discussed tax increases or directed staff to indicate to us what budget increase of 0%, 1%, and 2% would look like. I was just wondering through the CAO if those commissions have been made aware of those expectations so that in their planning for budget coming up, that there's not going to be any surprises to them and they're not going to plan a budget increase of 5 or 6 or 7%, and then all of a sudden be told, oh, sorry, you can only commit a 2% or 1%.
Mr. Mayor, yes, we have finance has communicated with our various outside boards and commissions. So the guidance from Budget Committee has been passed along.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips, for that. I just want the CAO to briefly touch on a conversation that she had with the president of Brock University, just in terms of the information that has been exchanged around the return to school. And because this will have an impact on our discussion for next week. And if you could just briefly touch on it to the CAO.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. We have been throughout this time meeting and connecting with Brock University as certainly a strong member in our community, affecting both whether Brock is in session or not, affects our transit commission, affects rental housing in the community, affects our downtown. So we've maintained, we normally have a regular relationship with them, but we've maintained specific conversations around this. So Brock is at this point looking at a significantly online presence for their students and education this fall. They are, however, there are facets of the education that are more effectively achieved through in-person student learning. So they are working over the next little while as to what that looks like. There have been certainly to us specifically no specific directions of what percentage and what components that will make, but they are certainly working through somewhat of a hybrid solution. However, much of the focus will certainly be on online learning for the fall.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow up on that, and in discussions with the Niagara College president, Sean Kennedy, echoing the same sentiment around online learning. And while it's a little bit more difficult with the college system because of its applied learning, where it's a lot of hands-on, they are looking at moving whatever they can to an online platform as well. So I asked the CIO to bring that up because I think over the next 2 weeks, think about that as council, because the impact it's going to have on our economic recovery, there will be a cascading impact, right? So whether it's transit, whether it's rental housing, or whether it's the vibrancy of our, not just our downtown, but the Penn Center, 4th Avenue, the Avondales, the Busy Bees, all the places where students quickly go into to grab something, our fast food restaurants. So these are things that with the CAO, we've been looking at through the recovery lens. And so if you could just pay attention to that as council when we get our recovery plan in 2 weeks, that helps to inform, we may have to make some challenging decisions, I guess is what I'm getting at. So I just want to say thank you to the CAO and her team for taking us through this. I also want to say thank you to councilors for getting the public to send their requests to Citizens First. A lot of you are doing that now, and so it's helping to facilitate getting the answers from staff back to the resident as quickly as possible without it having to sort of sit with counselors. So that's a good move that you're making, and I do appreciate that. If I have a mover for the recommendation of the report, Councillor Dodge, would you like to make that? Seconded by Councillor Phillips.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Seconded by Councillor Phillips. I'll look to the clerk to call the question.
Will there be any discussion, Mr. Mayor, on the motion itself, or just gonna?
The motion is to move the recommendation in the report to receive.
Okay. Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Councillor Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Harris,
Yes.
Councillor Kushner,
Yes.
Councillor Littleton,
Yes.
Councillor Miller,
Yes.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Cisco,
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento,
Yes.
Councillor Townsend,
Yes.
Councillor Williamson,
Yes.
and Mayor Senzik.
Yes. Sounds like someone's at a gun range.
Carried unanimously.
I don't know who's at a gun range, but maybe not pull the trigger while you're trying to vote. Okay, I'll now call upon Anthony Martuccio, which I think is now correctly spelled, the Director of Engineering, Facilities, and Environmental Services. And this is to provide an overview of the Shoreline Protection Restoration Award of Tender Report, Project 20132, Abbey Muse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In a shoreline protection review that was completed in Q1 of 2019, it was identified that the shoreline in the Abbey Muse area between Considine Ave and Christie Street was experiencing severe erosion and is one of the city's top priorities for shoreline protection. High water levels in Lake Ontario in 2019 continue to cause accelerated erosion of the shoreline, resulting in added slope failure. If left unaddressed, the continued erosion of the city-owned shoreline will result in damage to the city right-of-way infrastructure, loss of city property, and damage to adjacent private residents. The city's original intent was to budget and complete the work in 2 phases. Phase 1 would have addressed shoreline between Considine Ave and Abbey Ave in 2020, and Phase 2 would have addressed the remainder of the shoreline by the end of 2021. During the design of Phase 1, it was identified that access to the shoreline would be difficult and disruptive, that the potential of awarding 2 different contractors could result in warranty conflicts, and that the water levels in Lake Ontario in 2020 are expected to be favorable in order for us to complete the work. Execution of the project requires in-water works, which are subject to restricted windows of opportunity in the summer and winter months. Awarding the contract as one tender could result in all work being completed prior to the 2021 summer season. The report before you today is requesting approval for budget reallocation and award of both phases to the low bidder, which would enable construction to commence in the summer of 2021.
Okay, thank you, Director Martuccio. I have Councillor Williamson with a question, followed by Councillor Garcia.
Thank you. I just less like to thank staff for doing this and doing it quickly. It's urgent. The water level is still high. We're not going to break records hopefully this year, but it's still high. And I'd be happy, I'm sure, along with my ward mate, to move the recommendation at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Garcia. There you go.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like my colleague, I just wanted to thank staff for being so responsive. We received a lot of complaints from residents in that area. And I know the emails have gone to staff as well. And the fact that it's being done all in one tender should really please the residents. And it was becoming a real emergency situation for some of them. I'm very pleased that staff was able to come through with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garcia. Councillor Kushner.
Savings of combining the two as opposed to having them done separately.
Director Martuccio.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are potential savings as it relates to mobilization and demobilization required for the contractor. The access to phase one requires the implementation of an access to the part of phase two where the shoreline would go. So there are costs associated with that, which would be savings as well. And also savings of having to retender this or tender it a second time in order to complete the second phase. There's savings associated with that. Exact numbers are difficult to predict at this point in time, but there's always savings when you can combine projects to get them completed at one time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Kushner. Seeing no other further questions, I just will provide some context. I had a discussion with our St. Catharines MP, Chris Biddle, about federal funding for this project. And you saw in the report that staff had explored a number of different avenues. I've asked him to ask his counterparts in Ottawa what the opportunity is. I believe this is climate change mitigation. I believe that this is part of green infrastructure. We don't control the water. We don't control the water course at all across the Great Lakes. That is a federal jurisdiction. And I guess I'm just echoing my frustration that there is a green infrastructure fund of $10 billion. And for some reason, waterfront restoration doesn't fall under that category. I still can't figure that out. I can't get my head around that. It's green infrastructure, it's sustainability, it's about climate change, and yet we're not able to fit into it. So if I can ask Director Martuccio, is there, I know you did a lot of the research with your team, is there any avenue that we haven't explored, or is there anything we looked at FCM to see if there was funding through their green project funds? It just seems to be an absent category of which a lot of municipalities on the Great Lakes are facing, and there's no support from our federal provincial counterparts.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we investigated all the funding opportunities that were available at the time, and either due to the size of our population or size of municipality, or just the scope of the actual individual projects, we did not fall within the parameters. There are fundings available, but the restrictions that are associated with them have not allowed us to apply for them.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to say that because I think the unfortunate part of this is this isn't going to be the last project. To Director Martuccio, this won't be the last project on restoration. We did one last year that cost upwards of $1 million. We're now this will put us into the 3.2 range for just a small section of shoreline, and there's a lot more to go. If Evan can put the motion on the screen, we can see what the motion is. And if there could be an addition to the recommendation that the provincial and federal governments create include shoreline protection as part of their infrastructure program, whether it be green infrastructure. And if council supports this, I just think we got to put it on their radar at some point that this stuff, there's got to be some cost sharing in these programs. Does anyone have an issue with that? It could be the gas tax. So what MPP Biddle was talking about is increasing the language in the gas tax, federal gas tax, that it would allow for waterfront restoration like this. So that's one area that we could be looking at. I just want to be able to go to both our MP and MPPs and say, here's a project that should fall under a category. Can they go fight for it? Okay. So if there's no question on this, I'll look to the clerk. We've got Councillor Williamson moving it, Councillor Garcia seconding it. And if we can have the clerk call the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Counselor Harris,
Yes.
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Dodge,
Yes.
and Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
Carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you for that, and echo the sentiments of the ward councilors that the staff put a lot of work into that and great work on getting it to where it is today. The next one is 3.3 financial management services. And this is the budget standing committee meetings of May 11th, 2020. Sub item 10.2 from the meeting of March 11th, 2020. And the floor is to count to the budget chair, Councillor Cisco.
To bring this particular item forward, and I'm going to ask for a motion that staff develop a policy for cul-de-sac and boulevard grass cutting for the next budget standing committee meeting forthwith. The intention of this, when this came forward as part of the budget consultations this past year, most of us, when we think of cul-de-sacs and boulevards, think about the small circles. And I think it's important to note that it's been raised by several councillors, and I think correctly, that there are some cul-de-sacs in the city that are quite large, some bordering on the size of soccer and football fields. And in situations like that, it makes sense for the city to take on that grass cutting activity. However, we don't have a policy. And I think that's part of the reason why this was originally brought forward to the budget committee and was taken out of the budget this past year, in that we were cutting a number of cul-de-sacs that really shouldn't have been. So the purpose of this is to ask staff to come back with a policy. And in speaking with CAO Chemnitz, she's indicated that shouldn't take too much, basically to set a square footage or square meterage of area that would make sense. And the important thing to note, and I clarified with the CAO today, cul-de-sacs that aren't cut, so those larger cul-de-sacs will still receive service, even without this being in the budget. It's simply a matter of it won't be on a frequent basis. But the quicker we can get this to the budget standing committee with a policy and a dollar figure attached to it, we can make a quicker decision on getting to the appropriate levels of service. But I think we need to have some sort of policy brought forward, because what we had before was very haphazard and didn't make a lot of sense. And I know that there are a number of these cul-de-sacs in the city. I've been made aware of them, and they're pretty clearly deserving of that. So my hope is that council will support this. As I said, there will still be grass cutting services in those areas if they're not cut. When they get to a certain length, they'll be cut regardless. That's a part of the normal municipal works work plan in general. But moving forward, having a policy will allow us to make sure that those larger cul-de-sacs are cut on a regular basis, and that service is maintained. So again, I would hope that council can support this and we can get this policy done as quickly as possible.
Okay, so I've got Dara, the Director of Municipal Public Works. He just wants to add something. Undo him. Let's go. And there you go.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not exactly sure that I have the ability to get the policy in place for the next BSC meeting. As I explained previously, we are short-staffed here. It is requiring a lot of additional management activities to manage the staff, the reduced staff, and try to meet all the required things that we are continuing to do as more essential services. I will make my best effort to get that policy in place. I'm just not exactly sure that I have the resources to accomplish that at this point.
Okay, Councillor Cisco, you just had a reply.
And just looking, we do have a BSC meeting, which is only in a few days. So my apologies. My intention was the next budget committee meeting. Obviously, it likely wouldn't be possible for that. But in speaking to the CEO earlier today, there was a feeling that should be possible. Essentially, what the policy needs to be is what square footage is appropriate for the city to be taking on the process of cutting that cul-de-sac. And we need a costing associated with it. Because the process up to this point with cul-de-sacs being added to this list was it was haphazard and there was really no rhyme or reason to it because we had no policy in place. So I'm hopeful that, you know, within the next couple of weeks that can be clarified and put into a short report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cisco. I got Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councilor Cisco for clarification. I understand the need for a policy, but I'm concerned that that could take some time. And he did comment that cul-de-sacs will still be cut. Like, we've received emails and phone calls from a number of residents that are very concerned, and some of whom explained that they're very old and frail and they can't possibly cut the cul-de-sac. And they're saying that a couple of them actually even threatened to sue the city because they feel that since it's city property, we're responsible. So is there a way that we could decide right now to restore the cul-de-sacs that were cut the previous year for this year, and then wait for the policy, which could take some time, as the director said?
Councillor Cisco, yeah.
Well, the issue there is that I would imagine anybody who's watching this, there's a number of residents in the community who are surprised to find some cul-de-sacs are cut. And while I recognize that individual residents may not be able to take it on, as was mentioned, in those situations where the grass grows long on city property, we will go out and we will cut the grass. But I mean, it's very similar to boulevards. All of us have boulevards that we have to maintain, and this situation is not really any different. In speaking to staff, the grass will be cut. It will be on a less frequent schedule because this was taken out of the budget. But the issue that remains is that there are some areas that have been advantaged over other areas in the community because at one point or another, their circle, their street got added to a list. And fundamentally, that's not fair to the rest of the city. If residents are all paying the same in property taxes, outside of those very large cul-de-sacs, I think it falls upon the neighborhoods to take care of those common areas. And if they don't, well, then the city will step in on a less frequent basis. And I don't see a better way to move forward with it at this point, because ultimately we need to have a policy to be able to determine what areas should be cut. And going back to what was done in the past means, again, advantaging some residents over others. And I don't think fundamentally that's fair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Cisco. Can I get some clarification from the director as to what Councilor Cisco just stated? Does that mean that we are watching the cul-de-sacs that were cut before, and if they get too long, we're going to cut them? Like, I've heard from some residents who say the grass is getting so long that it's going to create ticks and weeds and problems and so on. Are we going to be cutting them when they get too long? Is that a commitment from the director?
Director Smith?
No, me.
CAO?
I can start. Yeah, let me start first. Sorry. I want to correct a little bit of confusion. The saying that we will cut them is not on a regular basis like we have before. So what we do need to understand is there were certain and only certain cul-de-sacs in the city that received weekly grass cutting services from the city. Other cul-de-sacs that received nothing. So we were attempting to rectify what we felt was an inequity. We should have had a policy, and to make that clear, and it would have avoided all the confusion that, you know, we apologize that we're in today. So when we say we would cut them, that is we would, when they reach that high level grass, where we would certainly be enforcing that on a residence to say your grass is too high, we ourselves would cut our own. So that might be on a monthly basis. That might be depending on how quickly the grass grows or doesn't during the summer, more in the spring, less in August and September. So that's the reference to we would be cutting it. We would be cutting it when it becomes high such that the long grass complaints would be coming in. as well, what council also needs to recognize is that a major part of our mitigation of the losses during this pandemic is no hiring of students, no hiring of casuals, laying off of all part-time staff. So if we do start to bring services back, that $2.9 million will very quickly increase to 3.5 or 4 or 4.5. Not that this would be that entire thing, because certainly this is less of that amount, but staff would like to do it on a manner where we've considered the whole city and would very much like to have a policy that we can bring to BSC. We will try our hardest to have something, if it's not a full policy, it's at least parameters that BSC can consider on Monday. It won't be a polished policy, as that takes more time, but to address certainly Councillor Garcia's concerns that how long will this take, we will expedite it, because this has been a concern that has been much talked about, and certainly to Councillor Cisco's point of some of these cul-de-sacs are truly very large, and in the community's mind, when we talked about not cutting cul-de-sacs, those weren't a consideration. So we would like to bring that policy forward, as was already moved at BSC, but instead of for the 2021 year, we'd like to get it to as soon as we possibly can to a budget committee meeting.
Okay, I'm looking at Councillor Garcia for a wrap up on this one, for his questioning.
Okay. I'm still not clear, like how would staff know when a cul-de-sac is too long? We can't expect them to be out watching all the cul-de-sacs. Will we expect the residents that are concerned to phone this in to Citizens First, or what would the process be?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that would be the process. If a resident has a concern with respect to a length of grass, then we would take that and respond accordingly. Just to clarify, our priority with respect to bylaw enforcement right now is noxious weeds, and the grass cutting takes a secondary step to that. It's not that we wouldn't be doing the length of grass cutting, but we will be dealing with the noxious weeds first and allocating the resources to deal with that first, because that's the more serious situation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Garcia. Okay, we've got to roll the dice here because we've got a whole bunch of people who want to speak. I had Councillor Townsend up, and then I believe Councillor Miller's got his hand up. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. I guess my concern with this is similar to what Councillor Cisco says, is some of the larger cul-de-sacs. I understand that, I mean, these are city properties. I do think that as a Citizens First mandate, kind of what our focus is to offer some sense of service. I do think as a city, we should have to maintain those. I guess I'm trying to get my head around why all those cul-de-sacs were removed out of the budget. And that being said, I'm also curious about the frequency as to how often they would be cut. I don't necessarily agree with having to wait on residents to call in every time to their councilors to let them know that a grass in a larger cul-de-sac neighborhood is too long. So I wonder if I can get some clarification here.
Thank you, Councillor Garcia. Director Smith.
We'll try that again. So through you, Mr. Mayor, first off, we're not asking the residents to call the councillor. We're asking the residents to call the city. I can very clearly allocate resources to cut cul-de-sacs, but it means bringing additional resources back on. I cannot, within our current complement that we have at this point, allocate take from other areas that are more significantly important and reallocate those resources to cut cul-de-sacs. If it is council's wish that we continue with the list or a portion of the list or all of that, then that can be accomplished, but it just requires additional resources.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my intuition here is that I think we have a responsibility right now to continue cutting these larger cul-de-sacs, but I do agree that we need to have some type of bylaw put in place or something in place where it comes down to the size of a cul-de-sac, because some of the calls I've been receiving from some of these senior citizens who live around cul-de-sacs that are quite large to maintain, I don't think that should be up to them to maintain. So I do think in the meantime, I think we need to find a way to maintain the larger cul-de-sacs right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Townsend. And I believe we have Councillor Miller, Councillor Kushner, Councillor Williamson, Councillor Phillips.
Thank you. I actually have an alternative motion, so I'd ask my colleagues to vote this one down because it's pretty insufficient, and I'm going to tell you why. Basically, what happened with this one, as people might remember, is this was a situation where we cut a service first, and then we asked staff to ask the questions later. We took it out of the budget and said, okay, go develop a policy. The way we should do things, the better process, the better budgeting process would be to keep the money in because residents expect this service. And then if you want to develop a policy for 2021 or whenever you do it then. You don't remove the money, remove the service without really telling anyone that we're doing that. And then say, because we need a policy in place. So what I would like to ask us to do today, restore the $93,000 from the tax stabilization reserve so we can resume cutting for this year as we develop the policy. So I don't have people calling me crying, saying their husband hurt themselves, drove over a metal spike. It went through his leg when he tried to cut it himself. I ended up paying to get one in my ward cut, which is not a big deal, but obviously it's not what should be happening in these situations. Frankly, my understanding talking to Director Smith was that we wouldn't even be doing the cutting on the complaint base. We'd be doing the noxious weed, doing the whipper, and that's about it. And frankly, even this motion, it's wonderful, as we said in December, to have a policy. That's great. Like that, I think that's beautiful, but it would be like drawing blood from a stone at this point. They don't have the staff resources. They're going to come back with a policy that we're not going to be able to enact. We need to add staff resources, as he just said, so we can hire students, the 10 students, 6 students, however many we want to do. If we want to reduce the frequency, that's great. My residents, they said they don't need it every week, but they need to be done. And it's becoming a danger. Again, I like Councillor Townsend said, I don't see how we're not liable for stuff like this. Again, this is what happens when we get sort of obsessed with reducing the budget number instead of having a people-based budget and really think about how these decisions are really affecting people. So hopefully that's a lesson for all of us, because I think, this is our responsibility, and what we expect of residents, we should certainly expect of ourselves. So I would like to ask us to vote down this motion, have an alternative motion to re-add the budget for this year, because I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to residents at all. And yeah, like I said, I think there's some confusion about what's going to happen. The report seems to suggest if we just let them go and a resident complains, we're going to cut them. And Director Smith has made it pretty clear to me that we don't even have the ability to do that, and certainly not anywhere that would be considered a timely manner. So the policy is great, and we had that go forward from December. So we don't need to really say much about that, but I think we do need to restore the resources right now.
Okay, just some clarification to, I guess, to the CAO. When it came to the budget, so it wasn't council that said remove cul-de-sacs, it was staff that came with that recommendation, was it not?
Mr. Mayor, as I recall, yes, that it was a reduction by staff in the budget process. I'm sorry, I'm not recalling at which point, but certainly it was a reduction put forward by staff during the process. It was discussed at, there's a appendix to the report indicating it was discussed at budget committee, it was discussed at council, budget committee had discussed it again, and now it's coming forward with the budget committee minutes.
Right, and just again for clarification, it wasn't something that council pulled out of thin air. This was something that staff came in as part of a strategy, correct?
Correct.
And so if there was I think building on what Councillor Miller was talking about, it's not staff, it's not council's error in this. It was the fact that staff didn't come with a supporting policy to help get around what was going to be a potential public issue. Is that correct?
Certainly a policy is what's required. If you're going to change, acknowledging that it wasn't a level of, we were providing something that wasn't a level of official level of service, but certainty to provide that policy going forward would have made this a much clearer process. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make sure all the facts are on the table so that people
Yes.
who are following at home actually understand that this wasn't a council directive. This came from staff. Okay, so we have Councillor Kushner, I believe.
have a concern about the direction we're going in. To me, the cul-de-sacs are public property, and therefore they are a basic public service. And we've heard that if you complain, staff will go and cut the grass. If you don't complain, they won't go and cut the grass. Well, what happens if you have two neighbors or two people on two different streets? One's a chronic complainer and the other isn't. So that to me is introducing another inequity. And the question I have is, what do other municipalities do? What's the common practice with respect to cul-de-sacs?
That's a great question. I'll go to either the CAO or the director of, because that was in the report that came to council in December. So Director Smith.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there are some other municipalities do have policies, some do not have policies, some have an ad hoc approach to this as well. I just wanted to clarify the cutting on a complaint basis. Just because there is a complaint doesn't mean that it's cut immediately. It would be cut as part of responding to the complaint. It would be a lower level of service than we would normally do, even for those complaint cuts. So that's something that we do as we have staff available to do it. And as I said, the priority would be the noxious weeds. The development of a policy, I mean, from the perspective of getting council information, we can very easily provide the square meters of the cul-de-sacs within the city and the locations and the sizes, and give you an estimate with respect to cutting them. When I spoke of developing the policy and the issues around that, that would be a polished final document. That would be a little more difficult. I respect Councillor Cisco saying not the next BSC, which is a few days or just a short time away, potentially the one after that. So I hope that clarifies the situation.
Okay, normal maintenance on the cul-de-sacs. Who does that? Looking after the ruts in the grass, etc.
Director Smith.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if there is a issue with the cul-de-sac that is not grass cut related, but related to some other thing, again, we will respond and deal with those issues. There are, as stated previously, approximately 300 cul-de-sacs in the municipality, of which there are approximately 45 greater than 300 square meters. Those are the kind of magnitude of numbers that we are talking about at this point.
Okay, just for clarification, if we continue with the status quo, what's the additional cost? Or what's the non-cost savings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we decide to establish the grass cutting for the rest of the season, we're talking approximately the $93,000 that was listed in the budget. We are fairly close still to the start of the grass cutting season. So we would anticipate that it would be close to that full cost to implement the previous year's program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. To the Director Douglas, in terms of the comment about a tax stabilization fund, is there anything left in that fund?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. With regards to the balance of the tax stabilization reserve, at the end of 2019, we had approximately $313,000 in that reserve, and that reserve has been earmarked as one of the sources to mitigate the $2.9 million shortfall that we're anticipating due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, just want to clarify because that was brought up by Councillor Miller. Councillor Williamson and Councillor Phillips.
Well, thank you. I'll start by reminding everyone that what we've got in front of us is simply a recommendation by a committee of council. It was referred on budget night. So this cut was never approved by council. This is really the first time we're dealing with it since budget night. So I commend Councillor Dodge for doing that. Yes, we don't have a set in stone bureaucratic policy, but what we've had in my experience over the last 20 years is a fairly pragmatic tradition of cutting cul-de-sacs where there was a need to cut them, where there wasn't people available that were healthy and had the proper equipment to go out there and cut the cul-de-sac. So yeah, it doesn't, it might be a round peg in a square hole or whatever you want to say. It might be a little bit unclear, but sometimes those kinds of just traditional ways of managing work. We give credit to the people who volunteer and willingly go and do it. There's circumstances where we've got to look at it on a needs basis and based on fairness, where there's cul-de-sacs where you have physically challenged people, where you people who may not have the appropriate equipment to go out there and do it. The consideration of liability, which we're always talking about, we don't ask residents to go out and cut the grass in city parks. So I'm not sure why we really have an expectation that anybody should be going out there and taking into their own hands this kind of green smart garden maintenance. It doesn't make sense to me. I support the alternate motion that Councillor Miller has made. And he raises the point that this was talked about well before the coronavirus became an issue. In terms of fairness, it's not fair to residents to, or even to councillors who aren't on the committee, to learn about this cut from notices that go out to residents for a policy that wasn't authorized by council. So to me, there's no other alternative but to put the $93,000 back in if we have to hire some people back. Because otherwise what we're doing is, as Councillor Kushner pointed out, we're cutting an essential service. It's a reduction in service, which we did not approve as a whole council. So I'll support Councillor Miller's motion. In many of these places, this has been happened since they were built 50 to 70 years ago. There may be people who have a bit of an anti-suburban bent to them, but this is the reality of what we built, and the expectation was that we were going to take care of these green spaces, and some of them may be manageable by local residents, but some of them certainly are not. I mentioned the liability, and we are late in the day. Some of them are already looking like Alberta wheat fields in September, so something's going to have to be done with it. And I don't think that invoking a noxious weed law is a reasonable way to do it, or just to simply base it on complaints. Like I said, it didn't work exactly perfectly, and it wasn't, something that was cut and dried, but pragmatically, it kind of did work. And I can say one thing: I don't recall too many circles that have got service on a weekly basis over the years. That just didn't happen. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Phillips, you're up, then Councillor Porter.
Mr. Mayor, to Director Smith, you indicate in the report we have over 300 circles that in the city. How many of those do we actually cut? Like, I know we're responsible for cutting possibly all of them, but there are some people who in their circles, they cut them, and I know there's some in my ward, they're like a grass or like a putting green. They're so well maintained. We wouldn't need to cut that. So how many of those out of that 300 plus do we actually cut?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we cut 36. That's what our cut list is for on the cul-de-sacs.
So we have 300 cul-de-sac, or we have 300 cul-de-sacs, and we're only cutting 36 circles, 36 of them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Wow. So those 36 were that's based, the $93,000 is based on only cutting 36 of those circles.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. That surprises me that we have that number of circles. So we have, and what you're saying is the residents basically, we have 270 circles that are being cut by residents.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes.
Okay. Of those 36 that we do, how do we determine that we actually have to do those? Are they because of call-ins or because of size or what?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was no rhyme or reason to how this list developed over the past 14, 15 years. There is no logic to the size, location, or number. They were on a weekly cut list. So that list developed over time, and we did go and cut them using the student crews to do so. There would be times when, due to weather or due to either wet weather in the spring, there would be more frequent cuts, or through the summer when it's dry and grass isn't really growing, there would be less frequent cuts, but it did average to weekly over the year.
So the 93,000 that you're mentioning now, is that for the 36 circles, is that based on weekly cutting or less frequent? Can't hear you, sorry.
Try that again. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We would have to look at the availability. If we could not get students, we'd have to get actual staff members, call back actual staff members from layoff. That wage is higher than a student wage. So for the $93,000, we may not be able to get as many bodies. So using that number, we'd have to adjust the level of service. It's probably, it would go to on average every second week, because I'm thinking with a quick look at the numbers, we're probably talking about 6 staff members and instead of the 10 students, which roughly translates to just over half. So just based on that, you're probably looking at a 2-week cut frequency, or a planned 2-week cut frequency.
So for $93,000, those 36 circles would be cut every 2 weeks. That's what you're saying.
That would, yes, I would have to confirm those numbers, but based on what I've seen at this point, yes, that is correct.
Okay, and of those 36 circles, are they, that includes the largest ones? It surprises me that we're cutting so few, but those are the large ones that you've indicated primarily.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, actually, they're not all the largest ones. So we have, we cut 15 circles over 200 square meters as part of our list. There are actually 44 circles within the city over 200 square meters.
Oh, so we have residents that are cutting, some of the big ones are being cut by residents.
That's correct.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
I dropped my mouse, so couldn't get to the mute button. All right, Councillor Porter, I guess you're up, and then Councillor Sorrento and Councillor Littleton. There we go, I'm back.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. So I think it's safe to assume we spent about $1 million in the last 10 years to cut 36 cul-de-sacs. To me, this seems incredibly wasteful. Is there not something else that we could take a little bit of money and do something else with those cul-de-sacs so we don't have to cut them? Because it seems like an incredible waste of money, and not just a waste of money, but from an environmental perspective, we're just cutting grass and spending almost $100,000 on 36 cul-de-sacs. I just can't support it. And then to the director of planning, cul-de-sacs are sort of a legacy type of planning. I'm hoping that we don't approve these kinds of developments anymore because of the cost to maintain this. Just, I don't think we can sustain it in the future. So I'm hoping there can be a comment about that. So I guess this question would be to the director of municipal works. Could we plant something? Can we start to plant something else, or just get rid of the grass and put something nice in there so we don't have to cut these? I just don't think we can do it. And especially in the pandemic, this is not a priority for me. I'm sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we could take a look at other plantings. Obviously, there would be, there's actually going to be nothing we can do there that would be zero maintenance, but we could look at some things that would be lower maintenance. But that would, again, require a capital investment of to address that.
Councillor Porter, another question?
Yes, and I just do we allow these in developments now, like these circles with grass, or is that sort of from a bygone era?
Thank you. Through the mayor to the councillor, I agree with you. Cul-de-sacs are legacy leftover infrastructure for a period from the past style of suburban development. As you know, the city of St. Catharines is focused now on intensification and infill styles of development, where our approach to development is using our infrastructure and green spaces much more efficiently. And there's absolutely no appetite from the perspective of the department, or to be honest, from most innovative developers, to leave islands of landscaping for visual effect. So no, this is not a practice that we will be utilizing moving forward. The majority of the development that this municipality will see moving forward will be medium and high density forms of development, typically on either condominium or even freehold, but would not be reflective of a suburban style of development where we would have large cul-de-sacs.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, Councillor Porter?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you for bringing up the climate change, because I think that's one piece that's missing for this discussion. Councillor Sorrento.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Mayor, my question would be to the Director of Finance. Where would this 93, should the amendment, I believe, or should Councillor Miller's motion go through, where would this money come from, the $93,000?
Thank you, through you, your worship. At this point in time, it would be an increase in the city's deficit, and that we're forecasting as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we would need to look at our mitigation options as we're moving forward with regards to addressing the impacts of COVID-19.
Okay, and Mr. Mayor, my next question is to the city clerk. So procedurally, the amendment on the floor would have to fail, if you will, not be denied, and then Councillor Miller's motion would move to the floor. Is that correct?
You would have to, you'd be voting on Councillor Cisco's motion first, because that's what you're talking about. And then Councillor Miller's.
Okay, thank you. And then only if Councillor Cisco's motion fails, correct? Or isn't recommended?
Correct, because I believe they're very different. I haven't got Councillor Miller's motion in front of me, so I believe you're speaking to Councillor Cisco's only.
Okay, very good. Mr. Mayor, I got to say this, and I do agree with Councillor Porter. The $93,000, I don't think this would be fair to all of the other residents in the city if it gets to this point. And I know that many of the residents take care of their cul-de-sacs. In fact, I live on one, and my neighbor has been cutting that for well over 40 years. If you look at Wolseley Avenue, the residents there have adopted the circles there, and they do a phenomenal job. Now, getting to the concerns that we've received in the emails, I've got to believe, Mr. Mayor, and I can tell you, I have not received a lot of complaints with regard to cul-de-sacs not being cut in St. George's Ward. I have seen the ones that were sent to council. I've got to believe that staff can address this on a case-by-case basis, because I know I haven't received very many, and I got to believe, maybe what do we get throughout the year? Maybe 10, 12, and I understand that there has to be fairness in this, you know, if some people are elderly, but I've got to believe that we could respond to the case-by-case complaints for less than $93,000, Mr. Mayor. So we'll see how far it goes, and that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. Councillor Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering if the $93,000 and the hiring of these students, is that all they do is cut cul-de-sacs, or are they doing other city functions as part of that hiring of them? I don't know who would answer that question, but.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So it's the equivalent FTE. So the workload is spread out. So among different work groups, but it's the equivalent of the students that we're required to provide the cul-de-sac cutting. When you take those FTEs out of the complement, then the workload is compressed and reassigned to the other crews. And what is left off the plate then is the cutting of the cul-de-sacs.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can you just, okay, so I just didn't understand that. So what I'm asking is, for the $93,000, when we have these students come back, is that $93,000 just for them to cut the cul-de-sacs, or is it $93,000 to have them as part of the staff and they do other jobs as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would take those bodies completely to cut the cul-de-sacs on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did the, wow, this is quite the discussion. I think if we can back up, because I did chair that meeting that was in March when we had a discussion about the cul-de-sacs. I think when we were talking about it, the idea was that these were smaller pieces, like boulevards, as my colleague, Councillor Cisco, alluded to, small pieces of land that when we're facing major expenditures, there's things that we're looking to trim from the budget, and something that's evolved over time and quite likely from a complaint basis, but nobody really knows. So nobody can be accountable. And this is nothing against staff. It's nothing against counselors. Nobody's accountable to say, this is how we develop this program. So I think when we're looking at how do we get rid of some maybe extraneous funds that we don't need to be spending, that was why the decision was made. Obviously, it has since come to the attention of many people that I have one in my ward that is quite large. It's the size of a football field. So we've discussed this at budget, and we had a discussion at budget that we said, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't need to do all of them, but maybe there's some in the city that are too large, which is why Councillor Cisco brought forward this to expedite things, to look at the large ones, to put them back in the budget and for the city to take care of that. Because you're absolutely right. We do not want our elderly residents going out and spending 5 hours to cut a piece of property that belongs to the city. Having said that, I think we just heard from the director that we have 300 of these little cul-de-sacs in the city, and of them we cut 36. The numbers that he just gave us, if we're talking about an area of 200 square meters, that maybe that's the benchmark, maybe that's the one that we cut. But of that size, currently, we are only cutting 15 of those. So let's say that was going to be what we were going to, that's what we're going to use. So right now, those 15 come back online. But we just heard there's another 29 that are not cut that are the same size. So what do we do? I think we need to do a proper policy, which is what Councillor Cisco has brought forward to say, let's take a look at this so that we make sure we make the right decisions. It's not fair for Bob over in Grantham Ward to be cutting the cul-de-sac that is over 200 square meters and somebody else has theirs cut from the city. I think we really need to approve what's on the floor right now. And let's be clear, what is on the floor right now is Councillor Cisco's motion. That's what we're discussing and that's what we're voting for. I think doing that is prudent, especially considering we're already looking at a $3 million shortfall this year. We must be mindful of this. So let's look at creating a policy now, and let's get some of those maybe back on in the grass cutting schedule this year, but let's do it responsibly. Let's do it in an organized, logical manner instead of haphazardly, which is what got us to this point in the first place. And the other thing I want to mention is when we're talking about the budget committee, we do a lot of work, just as all the committees of council does. And I understand that sometimes people may not agree with decisions that are made, but it doesn't mean that people don't take the decisions of money that are made with a thought of being made against humans. So when someone is saying, you know, we got to start thinking about people, we do think about people at the budget committee. So I did just want to say that. So thank you. I support this motion. I want to see us to move forward with this. Let's get some of those big boulevard or the cul-de-sacs back in the list. Let's do it in a responsible, logical manner. Thank you very much.
We got Councillor Cisco's motion on the floor. I will just add that hopefully when the policy, if this goes through for policy development, that the lens of climate change will be applied to it. And I think, I don't know if I was talking to the CAO, but when you look at the amount of energy it will take to move forward on a program to cut a lot of the cul-de-sacs, if it goes in that direction, we've got to be consistent in our climate change approach as well. And with that, I'll look to Councillor Garcia. Do you have a question? Because I won't take a comment.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, from the clerk, I need to understand why those two motions are mutually exclusive. It seems to me that we can agree that we want a policy, but also agree with Councillor Miller's motion. Why are they mutually exclusive?
So to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Garcia, I don't have a motion right now from Councillor Miller, number one. And number two, he asked that it be a friendly amendment to this recommendation. And I don't believe it is, because I believe they're very separate. I would have to have Councillor Cisco and Councillor Miller have that discussion.
We should be only dealing with this one. Sorry, Councillor Garcia. You are correct that I don't think that they are in opposition.
Mr. Mayor, and for you to the clerk, if that is then an amendment, isn't the typical procedure that if it is not friendly, that we vote on that amendment first?
No, I'm going to jump in here. There hasn't been an amendment requested, and nor was an amendment made. There was simply a discussion. Councillor Miller has said he has got a motion. Let's vote this down, and you go to his motion. Well, no one knows what that motion is.
That's correct.
Here's the motion that's in front of us. So it's not. There was no amendment requested, no amendment made. So we're voting on this, and then we can look at what the next step is going to be. So I'm going to call the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. First off, Councillor Cisco, do you have a seconder? Will Councillor Middleton second that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
No.
Councillor Williamson.
No.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Sorry, just point of clarification because I was muted. Bonnie and Evan both do have my motion. I sent it this morning. Evan replied. And the main reason that they're not simple is one would restore cutting this year and one would not. So just to be clear on two misconceptions.
Councillor Miller, just to clarify, Councillor Cisco was on the agenda to speak, so your motion wouldn't have shown up until this one was voted for first. So I don't have yours on the screen is what I meant. I do have, Evan does have an email.
Thank you. No.
So Councillor Miller, no? Councillor Littleton?
Yes.
Councillor Kushner?
Mr. Mayor, I will be voting for both. Yes.
Councillor Harris. Councillor Harris?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Thank you. Councillor
Thank
Garcia?
you.
I would vote no on the assumption that we can't have the other motion. If we can have both, then I will vote yes.
So you're voting yes, then?
If we can have the other one up after.
Pardon me. So,
Okay, just mark them down as no.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of order. Point of order, please, Mr. Mayor.
What's the point of order, Councillor?
It's this. You know what? The clerk has called the vote. We have people that are speaking. We should only be voting. Why are we having conversations?
Councillor Dodge?
No.
Okay. Mayor Sendzik?
Yes.
And this is carried.
Thank you.
So the other one's lost.
No, the other one's not.
No,
lost,
it's not even on.
No.
Nothing's on the screen. Come on, folks.
Can you put, have you got it on the screen, Evan, or you got it?
So where are we? So a motion was sent in and
We did, what we do is we took the motions, we took it in order. Councillor Cisco was speaking to this, so his motion would go first. Councillor Miller sent in something as well. I was thinking Councillor Miller was going to put that, his motion, and ask that it be a friendly amendment. He did not. So we have this other motion, yes, but it came in after.
okay. So procedurally, we can refer this next motion to the next meeting of council, of which we will have the policy, and then we can combine them together.
Dad.
And then in the meantime, if there's any requests for the cutting of the boulevards, the cul-de-sacs, those would be done by the director of municipal works as required. So over the next 2 weeks, policy will be developed. Councillor Miller's motion will come to the next meeting of council. And in the interim, if the cul-de-sacs are getting long, then the director of municipal works has to make something work. Okay. Does that make sense to folks? Councillor Townsend, you got a hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Knowing that the other motion was an option, I would have voted in favor of having a policy. So, the confusion here, it's frustrating, very frustrating.
So the policy, but they're not mutually exclusive. So,
okay, well, I want a policy, but I also want to see something done with the boulevards. Anyway, thank you.
And so what will happen, Councillor, is at the next meeting, Councillor Miller's motion will come in conjunction with the policy. We'll have a policy, and then we can look at 2020 in terms of expenditure.
But can I just jump in? We were told that this first one would have to fail in order to have the other thing added back in the budget. That's where the confusion is lying for some of the councillors.
That came from a councillor, and that my mistake. I should have corrected the councillor on that one.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't want to, Councillor Williamson, can you add some clarity to this, please?
Well, my question is this, Councillor Dodge referred the $93,000 expenditure. We still have never voted on it. Where does that sit?
That'll come back at the next council with the policy as well. So with the policy, it'll be the next council. I can guarantee you at the next council meeting, there will be the policy plus Councillor Miller's motion.
Okay, and this is going to be in an actual report, not in minutes of a meeting or.
No, it should be in a report. I'll go to the CAO.
Thank you.
Where's the CAO?
I'm still here. I'm still here. Yes. So we will develop a policy. There is a budget committee meeting that happens on Monday, and the budget committee meeting can look at that policy, but it will be at the council meeting, our next council meeting. or that Councillor Miller can put forth his motion as a notice of motion, and we will have a report on this.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Miller, that should answer the interim of this, where the policy, your motion, and then in the interim, if there's any requests for cutting, they go to the Director of Municipal Works and he would add them to a list to get cut. So it's not like things are not going to get cut. They will have to get cut because we have a bylaw. So you can't let things go over a certain length.
Yeah, I guess just point of order, we already approved a policy in December, so I'm not really even sure why we're voting on that today, but I mean, we're just reaffirming something that we passed in December on budget night, but that's okay.
Okay. So you understand where we're going though? Like we're not dismissing your motion. It comes back with the policy plus it'll give staff time to look at the overall costs for everything.
Yeah, that's fine. 2 weeks ago, we were told that we'd have a motion today from a councillor by you, the mayor, about grass cutting, and we don't really have that. All we have is just giving a thumbs up to something we already did, but that's okay. 2 weeks, I'm sure, is when we'll actually see it this time.
Thank you for that, Councillor Miller. Always genuine pleasure. Councillor Littleton.
Hi, I just wanted to say that we have to, this cross, comments after the motion, we voted. We all were clear. The motion on the floor was Councillor Cisco's motion. That was clear. I'm thinking this is a point of order. That's our process. And if you want to have another motion, we're all well aware of notice of motion and other things like this that we have. So I do feel like we need to say that. The second thing is, can we just request, please, because there's been discussion about how something was referred, it wasn't voted on. Can we just be absolutely clear if something comes forward, if it's not a reconsideration before something might show up? So if we could just, it's just a request on that we're clear on the process. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for that. Procedurally, we just wanted to make sure, because this obviously is an issue that certain councillors are concerned about. We want to make sure that we're trying to drive this to a conclusion rather than leaving it open-ended. Councillor William Garcia, this will be your last comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a different question about the meeting of the Budget Committee on March 11th, and I don't know who I should address this to, but Councilor Littleton chaired that meeting, and you were there as well, and you will remember that I spoke regarding the flower baskets for Port Dalhousie and Meriton and restoring them. That was approved by the Budget Committee, but I see is nowhere to be found in the minutes.
Okay, I'll look to procedurally. This will have to go to either the CAO or the clerks. Someone has to take a run at that.
Christine Douglas.
Madam Clerk and Mr. Mayor, the motion that was made, and I'm referring to the March 11 minutes, and that there was a motion that the $25,000 be approved for the tax stabilization reserve to reinstate the funding to water the hanging baskets in both Merritt and Port Dalhousie in 2020. And with regards to the actual report that came back to council, staff had provided some additional commentary with regards to the status of, due to our current situation and the fact that we don't have the staffing resources to complete these tasks, that we don't have the staff to be able to water them. So therefore, that watering would not be occurring this year.
Okay, so I don't know if that answers the question. Councillor Garcia.
Okay, no, I apologize, Mr. Mayor, if that was in the minutes. I did not see it, but I did speak to the Director of Municipal Works afterwards, and he had already told me that that they couldn't afford to do it after all, but I just wanted to make sure that the minutes are accurate, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Garcia. Okay, so now we can move on. We have nothing in the in-camera, thankfully. And we're going to adjourn the general committee meeting. A motion arising from in camera, nothing there. Motion to ratify. So we have Councillor Kushner, that council adopt those items approved forthwith by the general committee on Wednesday, May 20th, 2020. Councillor Kushner, put up your hand. You can move this.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Seconded by
Sure.
Councillor Williamson. Thank you. And all in favor? Hands up. Great. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we have the next meeting of council. We have a motion. Whereas since the COVID-19 outbreak and the provincial and federal emergency declarations by many staff and councillors have been working from home, therefore be it resolved that the next meeting of council be rescheduled from Monday, June 8th at 6:30 p.m. to Wednesday, June 3rd at 3:30 p.m. And that further be resolved that staff provide appropriate notice to the public and the media. Can I ask the city clerk just to, we moved it by an hour. I want the city clerk just to provide some clarification and then maybe some direction as where we're moving forward.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. I reached out to Councillor Porter actually yesterday to ask her if, with her new employment, if 2:30 was a tough time for her. She said it was, but 3:30 would work for her, or she would make that work. And I was also awaiting what was going on with the schools for those teachers, and that's why we originally had put 4:30 as a start time. So we were thinking that the next meeting would be at 3:30, and then if council wishes, we would fall back into a 6:30 timetable, 6:30 on Mondays.
So this will be the last one sort of during the day. We are anticipating more public engagement as some of the topics come up, like the cannabis, the CIP, things like that. So we'll be moving back towards a Monday evening Zoom pretty much until we get the direction from the province that we can have more than under 25 people in a council chamber kind of thing. So it's still a moving target, but this will be the last one I think where we'll have it at this within this date period. Okay. So Councillor Dodge, you moving this motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move this motion.
Thank you. And seconded by
Councillor Phillips.
Councillor Phillips. Thank you. And look to the clerk to call a vote on this one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Harris. Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yeah.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Hardy, yes, Madam Clerk.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
And that's carried.
Okay, Councillor Cisco, you've got a motion to put on the floor regarding disability during the COVID-19 pandemic. If we can ask Evan to call it up on the screen.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. And do you want me to read the whole thing, Mr. Mayor, or just to speak to it?
Can you give us the Coles notes? Because I think for the public to know sort
of
this would be good.
I can definitely do that. It's come to mind, this is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Porter. We've been in contact with a resident who has a disability during this pandemic and has experienced some very frustrating circumstances. And in speaking to other folks with disabilities in the community since this was brought to our attention, I've learned that a lot of residents are dealing with frustrations around specifically the AODA and how some private companies are ignoring some accessibility regulations over the course of the pandemic. And so what we're asking for, and we've been in contact with MPP Stevens' office, we're asking for council to support a motion which we would hope MPP Stevens and other local area MPPs could bring to the legislature to look towards changes to the way the province enforces the AODA, specifically during states of emergency like the one we're currently going through. It has been a very difficult situation for some residents in our community to be able to access services. And while safety of workers is always paramount, there needs to be some proactive enforcement of the accessibility regulations in Ontario to make sure that those residents in our community that have disabilities are able to access services still. So we're hoping that this can be taken up by our colleagues at the provincial level and changes can be made to the AODA to help those folks in our community that do suffer from different types of disabilities.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cisco and Councillor Porter. Do we have any questions on this one, or I think it's pretty straightforward in the intent of the motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll look to the clerk to call the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yep.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Harris. Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
And Mayor Senzik.
Yes.
And that's carried.
Okay, Councillor Townsend, you're next. You're up with the unfortunate news with We Day, but understanding.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just keep this brief. Just to sum it up, yes, with the uncertainty around the COVID-19 pandemic, we are going to postpone the event until there's a time where there's a safe opportunity to do so. I just want to quickly thank all task force members, as we will dissolve the committee temporarily and then start recruiting when the time is right. So special thanks to all those members of the task force. Also, thank you to Brian York and the Economic Development Department, Phil Christie, Kobe Vanyo, and all city staff for their efforts on this project. We look forward to hopefully hosting it down the road when the time is right. So I'm just asking council to approve this and to also provide an update and my appreciation to all of those members who have been involved with this event.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Garcia and Councillor Sorrento, you have a question?
I'm going to speak in favor of this, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to say that I did have an opportunity to attend a couple of those sessions with the youth, and just a shout out to the entire team, staff, Councillor Townsend, for reaching out to our youth. It's extremely important to have them engaged. They do a phenomenal job. The energy levels are great. So I just wanted to support my colleague in this motion. So thank you so much. Great job.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to really just acknowledge the amount of work that Councillor Townsend did on that, and just to give him props, because it is such a huge undertaking what he was attempting to do. And I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. I just feel like he needs to be recognized for the amount of work that he did and the vision that he has and the rest of the staff that rallied around him. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. I couldn't have said it better. Councillor Townsend, you have led from the beginning on this, and I do believe that we'll bring a day like this back, and you'll be the leader. Keep up the great work. And I'll call the question to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Senzik.
Yes.
And that's carried.
Okay, so we have a notice of motion it was a motion that was submitted, I believe, either today or yesterday. And in order for this to be considered today, it's Councillor Cisco's motion on sidewalks, pop-up patios, and associated fees. And so if that notice of motion could be put on the screen, Evan. Did I lose everybody? Am I here?
Yep.
Okay. Whew. Is Evan here?
I'm here.
Can you pull up the screen, Evan? There it is. Sorry. Thank you. So this would be a notice of motion, and we would need 2/3 consent to consider this today. The intent is that businesses are looking to start to put in their patios in anticipation of the next couple of weeks getting announcements from the province. So is there a will of council to deal with this today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mr. Clerk, can we make sure it's 2/3? So everyone who's in favor, put up their hand.
you see?
I can see, I'm looking. I got Joe's thumb. Joe's thumb is right there.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you to count them because I can't see?
Oh, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then I don't know where Matt is. But yeah, that's 2/3. Okay.
Okay.
Councilors, thank you for that, council. I'll turn it over to Councilor Cisco to introduce the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, as the mayor indicated, obviously there's been a lot of major financial stress going on over the last 8 or 9 weeks. The expectation is that when the province opens up business activity to allow for restaurants, bars to be able to open up, that their seating capacity will be significantly decreased, and it will be much harder for businesses to have patrons inside. So what I'm hoping is waive all sidewalk and patio associated fees for 2020 as a means to help the businesses in the downtown core with the ongoing effects of the global pandemic. I will ask, I know, and I just for clarity's sake to the CAO, the report that's coming to the next council meeting will also be discussing the possibility of closing down St. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. In fact, the option of waiving the fees with the patio for patios and pop-up on the sidewalk is something that we were considering in the recovery process. But there's a sense of urgency as the weather's getting better and they want to prepare. So having that be presented at this council meeting is helpful, but the greater economic development recovery plan will be available at the next meeting.
And so that was the impetus for bringing this forward today and asking that we deal with it today, is to provide for some planning abilities for the businesses in the downtown, if they've been thinking about it, to know that the costs associated with setting up those patios will be zero for this year. As a way, one of the things that the city can help in helping to offer that opportunity. And as I said, there have been discussions, and we'll be coming forward later with the possibility of closing St. Paul Street down for some portions of each week on the weekends, specifically is what Councillor Porter and I have been looking at. But again, this is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Porter. And obviously the St. Paul Street closure is something completely separate and will come forward at a later date, but this offers the opportunity. We've done a lot of work in the downtown to make it more amenable to things like patios, pop-up patios and sidewalk patios. And so this is an opportunity for those businesses that need the help right now to be able to access that at no cost to try and help them with their business over the summer. So I hope that council sees fit to approve this and allow those businesses to get started with their planning.
Yeah, I've got 3 councillors. I got Councillor Garcia, Councillor Phillips, and Councillor Townsend. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the mover, I have what I hope will be a friendly amendment, and that would be that this would be done throughout the city, not just downtown. We have not as many, but we have pop-up patios in Port Lucie, and we have them in Meriton and some elsewhere. So
I'm happy to accept that as a friendly amendment, and admittedly, sometimes my focus sticks to the downtown, but I think if there's opportunity in other parts of the city, especially for restaurants and bars, I think that this is the only way to allow them to try and reach the revenue goals to allow them to survive. So I think it's a great idea, and it's a very friendly amendment.
okay, Mr. Mayor, and I assume we don't have to add that when that report comes, it will identify the cost of the city and how much that will increase the deficit.
So yes, I would anticipate that. Now, the question was this captured? So the question will have to be, was this captured in the 2020 budget as a line of revenue, as last year it was removed out of that because of the construction that we had to go through in 2018. So there might have been a gap in that, but that'll be in the plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Phillips, you're up.
Reading in the Standard today, it was interesting that the city of Grimsby has launched a program whereby restaurants there are being provided with PPE at no charge to some extent, and then significant reduction in costs for the equipment later on. As a friendly amendment, I'd like our Department of Economic Development and Government Relations to contact the downtown BIA to investigate a similar program so that those restaurants who are going to have this opportunity for the pop-up patios are supplied with the protective equipment that they're going to require at minimal or no cost.
Yeah, I think I'll go to the Director of Economic Development. I do know in Grimsby that it wasn't the town of Grimsby. So I talked to the mayor of Jeff Jordan, because someone asked me about, could the city do this for businesses? And Jeff Jordan's, it's not a Grimsby city initiative, it's a BIA. So that would have to go through Councillor Sorrento to the BIA to see if they have a plan to provide PPE, much like the BIA did in Grimsby. So there is no cost to the city of Grimsby at this time, but it's the BIA. So is that okay, Councillor Phillips? If we
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with that the BIA and, whether Chamber of Commerce, I don't know who, it shouldn't be on the city to provide funds, obviously, because we're seeing a significant deficit, as has been mentioned all afternoon. So, but to help those businesses downtown, everybody knows how they're struggling and hoping to be able to reopen. So any help would be huge for them. So the BIA, I think, should take that under their wing.
Okay, so staff be directed to contact the BIA, downtown BIA, since there's only one now.
Yes, thank you.
I
hope that's friendly.
Okay, about the opportunities regarding PPEs for businesses in the downtown area.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Garcia. And that's a friendly, Councillor Cisco?
Yes, it is, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Looking to Councillor Townsend.
Okay, let's see. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can everyone hear me? I can't see if I'm on or not. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank you to Councillor Cisco for bringing this forward. The only change I was going to make was made by Councillor Garcia to include all of the city. So my change has been made, and thanks again for bringing this forward, Councillor Cisco.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Okay, seeing no other further questions on this. Oh, Councillor Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regards to the one, I mean, I'm not opposed to it going citywide, but does staff have anything to comment about that, like what we spoke about this morning?
So that would go to the clerk, because the clerk made a very clear comment about the difference between the downtown agreements based on sidewalks and what would be a different approach, patios that are not on city sidewalks. So I'll go to the clerk for clarification.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Dodge. I was just asking the same question here in the room. So pop-up patios are very different than liquor license extensions on different buildings. So I just wanted it to be clear that a pop-up patio, I believe, is moving over the sidewalk, which is different, and so it goes through the liquor control, and so it's a bit different. And I just wanted to be clear on which ones we're actually waiving fees for. So, for example, let me use something like a restaurant, such as a keg, for example. I believe that's not a pop-up patio. So would we still be collecting fees or for any of their patios? So they're license extensions. It's very different. There's subtle differences, and they're in the application process. So I do believe I understand totally what Councillor Cisco is asking for, which is the pop-up patios that exist downtown in the core. I'm not sure how that spreads across. And when I believe Councillor Garcia mentioned that there's some in Portaluzzi, I believe those are part of a building inside. There's a few tables on the outside. That's not considered really a pop-up patio, but according to what we have in our categories. So I just wanted to give you that information, and I gave it to Councillor Dodge this morning.
Yeah, I guess what I want is to have clarity so that everyone understands the difference between the two and who would be, I guess, by the way this motion is, who would be included in that and then who would not be, so that there isn't any confusion as to how that would work.
And I guess I would ask Councillor Cisco, are you specific with just the pop-up patios, which are the ones in the core, the small ones in the core?
So the original intention of the motion was exactly that. But I'll be completely honest, with respect to the problems that have been outlined and the reasoning behind this, I think it extends across the board to all restaurants and bars and whatever form they're taking. So the intention of the motion is really to make it easier for those businesses where the opportunity exists to be able to expand their area, to be able to they likely still will not be able to maintain the number of patrons they're able to serve, but at least come close to approaching that number. So that's the intention of and I know staff always goes back and watches the video of this to recognize the intention. So that's the intention of the motion. And I think that was Councillor intention as well when he asked for the friendly amendment.
And I think Councillor Kushner, do you have a conflict or?
Yes, no, I have a question. It was clarified with respect to pop-up. Now, what about if the expansion is onto private property, a temporary private property patio, where a special license is needed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I ask Brian York to speak to that. He's clear on what that means.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not 100% clear on the outcome. That's a council decision, but you're right. I was going to raise the point that the difference is between public and private property. So the pop-up patios are for public property, so allowing a licensing agreement to encroach that area and serve over it. What I think you're asking is if I had a parking lot attached to my business and I'd like to grow or create a patio in that space to encourage more patronage, that's a licensing agreement as well. And I think we need some clarification if Councillor Cisco's motion is going to address private property.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, meaning what?
Yes, it does address it addresses, again, it goes to the heart of the problem. The intention of this is to allow bars and restaurants the ability to try and recoup some of the lost patronage. So it extends to private property. Yes.
Well, if that's the case, Mr. Mayor.
That is the intention of this.
Yes, then I'll declare conflict of interest.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So noted under 11.4 motions, Councillor Kushner is declaring conflict, and it's the reason being is he's a owner of an establishment that has a patio potential.
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Question. In this regards, does this have anything to do with people having to apply to the Alcohol and Gaming Commission for licensing?
No.
Okay, fine. Then I don't have to declare conflict. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Let's call the question on this one.
Pardon me? Councillor Miller, I believe, has his hand up. I can't see it, sorry.
Yeah.
Councillor Miller? Sorry.
How many of these do we allow each year? Like how many licenses do we grant for these things?
I'll go to Director York because there is no upset limit.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, by our count, there's 14 patio licenses in the downtown.
But we don't say 15 and that's it. It's anyone who wants one could apply, pay the fee. Then I guess
through you, Mr. Mayor, correct.
Yeah, I definitely support the idea here. I guess I'm a bit concerned every single bar and restaurant's going to do this downtown and on Hartselle Road, and we're going to lose a lot of sidewalk space. People start walking. Like, is there a safety, I guess maybe to Chief McCormick, is there any sort of safety concern of if every single establishment does this?
Yes, so they all go to, who's in charge of this? Is it Director of Fire Services, Chief McCormick?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a combination of staff that review the applications.
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, just want to throw some caution into the wind, and that what we've got to be careful of here is there's two considerations. One, if you have an extensive streetscape with patios on next to the roadway, we've got to keep in mind what happened in the city of Toronto a few years ago. So we got to make sure that we also look into providing protection and space away from the roadway so that we don't have vehicles going over the curb and onto the sidewalk patios. The other thing is that when the fire department looks at current situations for assembly occupancies, bars and restaurants where we have occupant loads, there are provisions that your occupant load for the building cannot be exceeded when you put people on the patio. Because of inclement weather, those people have to be able to move from the patio into the establishment. So we have to keep that in mind as well, is that if there becomes restrictions to how many people, the government puts restrictions as to how many people can be in the restaurant, then simply by putting them out on the patio for a period of time might not change that overall number because of inclement weather. Those people have to be able to move back inside. So we've got to be careful, and there has to be some good thought to make sure that we're looking at occupant loads and that we're looking at safety as well. Again, we haven't got into the discussions per se about closing roadways.
Okay, so we're not going to go there, Chief?
Yeah.
Like we're just, this is just about waiving the fees, because I think you'll be speaking to something on a larger level at the next meeting. Greg, Councillor Miller?
I mean, honestly, I think there's enough safety concern here that, you know, I think it's a good idea, but it feels like we're making it up a little bit on the fly. So I'd prefer to refer to staff for a report on it to make sure we're doing it safely.
So again, you've already spoke to it, so you can't offer a referral. This is just simply waiving of the fees, Councillor Miller. This isn't about going around what's already established. So this has been around for a number of years now. There's a very prescribed process that people have to go through. So it's not, we're not throwing anything at the wind. This is actually a very prescribed process. All we're asking is that this be waived in terms of the fees, not the process. We're not waiving the process, simply the fees.
I mean, I don't think that's reflective of what the chief said, but.
Well, it is reflective of the chief said, because he was talking about process, and there is already a process in place for him to do that. Councillor Porter, you got your hand up.
To echo Mr. Mayor, what you just said, this is Councillor Cisco and I and Councillor Sorrento have been talking about this. Businesses like Mate Cafe and Cully's, they have patios, they have agreements with the city. This is just about having them not pay the fees. So I don't want to refer this. We just need to pass this so that they can put their patios up when it's time to go. Without having to pay. This is all this is about. And the talking about moving things onto the road or St. Paul Street, that's a discussion for another council meeting where we'll have all these, we'll discuss all those safety considerations there. So I'm urging council to pass this motion to waive the fees. It's just about the fees. It's for things that have been on St. Paul Street for years.
Councillor, thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Cisco, then we got to wrap this up.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I mean, you've said it and Councillor Porter said it. I'm not asking to waive any of the regulations which have to do with these, simply to waive the fees to make it more attractive for businesses to look into. They would still have to comply with all of the regulations that the city holds.
Okay. Call a question to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Counselor Phillips,
Yes.
Counselor Miller,
Yes.
Counselor Littleton,
Yes.
Counselor Kushner. Sorry,
Conflict.
Counselor Harris, Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Dodge,
Yes.
and Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
And that's carried. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully this will be a lead story. That'd be good. This is a good news story for the businesses in our community that are looking to find some measure of getting out of this issue.
For sure.
Report requests. Are there any report requests? Anything came in via email? Counselor Phillips?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not asking for a report because the report was already issued, but it is Airbnb season again. Obviously, I had an email from Director Kate about a situation, and I think it was in Port Weller, that there was 12 people at a Airbnb this weekend. I know way back when last year this started, there's going to be a lot of people in Port Weller. It's going to happen this summer. I'm sure. I know Councillor Garcia and Councillor Williamson have the same problem in Port Dalhousie. I've been told we can't move forward because we can't have public meetings. And if we're going to pass a bylaw, we have to have a public meeting. That being the case, I'm hoping that as soon as we get back to normal, whatever that is going to look like, that this issue is going to be able to be brought to council in one of those first meetings so that we can get something in place, because it's getting worse all the time. And the people in Port Weller are really concerned. I've had about 5 phone calls already about their concerns, and it's only going to get worse. And so I think we have to expedite this. The email I got said that it would be something that would be brought to us later in the summer. Well, I'm hoping that as soon as this opens up, that we can get this looked after. Just a comment. Already been issued. There's nothing more to be. I don't know if Director Kate would like to add anything to that, to what I just said.
Through the mayor to the councillor, thank you, Councillor Phillips, for your comments. The council was provided with a report on short-term rentals in February of this year that laid out the process that has to be taken for the 2-step project that we're undertaking. So the first step that we were directed to undertake was a zoning bylaw amendment process to regulate short-term rentals. And then the second aspect that we were to look at was around licensing. In order for the licensing work to begin, we need to know where we're at from a zoning bylaw standpoint. And to do the zoning work under legislation, we need to have a public meeting. While the legislation exists now for us to undertake those types of meetings online, I don't think we have the comfort level yet to have a policy discussion that's that contentious and large on a Zoom platform. So we continue to suggest that until such time that we can hold a type of public engagement process appropriate for that scale of a project, that it's going to be put on hold. At the start of the COVID situation, we all the department heads assessed their individual work plans through a lens of what was absolutely necessary under the provincial orders in terms of essential services, as well as looking at things like what are legislatively required to be looked at this year and things that are perhaps revenue generating. And so through that lens, when we looked at our departmental projects, short-term rentals, as well as a few others, were put on hold in effort to focus on core day-to-day business. So at this time, the short-term rentals project will be placed on hold until we have a better grasp of how we can hold meaningful public engagement in a format that's appropriate for that level of a project.
But the fact that now we are in recovery, will we be ready to go as soon as we are able to have those public meetings?
Staff have been, so through the mayor to the councillor, the staff person responsible for that project has been redeployed to other areas. They are working now on projects that relate to tighter legislative timeframes, as well as revenue generating projects and day-to-day business. So we can bring that person online shortly to start that work, but again, they're going to hit a wall, at which point they need to do some public consultation, and we're not there yet. When we get through perhaps the second stage of reopening and we have a better idea of what, if any, future waves of infection look like, then at that time we can reassess bringing that project back online. But I don't suggest that it would be before September.
During our discussion, we talked about investigating best practices, such as it was mentioned to me by Councillor Garcia. Collingwood has something in place. Toronto's looking at something. Have we investigated that already, or are we going to have to go at that again?
No, we've been keeping on top of what other area municipalities and other regional areas in North America are doing in that regard. That will help inform not just the zoning process, but also the licensing project. We will be, at that time that we're prepared to come forward to council with a recommendation, it will keep in mind of what those other municipalities are doing in this regard and just how much resourcing we want to apply to a program such as this. Collingwood does have a very extensive short-term rental program, but it's also backed by very significant resources that I don't think that we have the appetite for, especially in a post-COVID world.
Okay.
Well, that's something we have to go after. I think it's something that's important to look after immediately. Thank you.
So can I ask Councillor Phillips if you can connect with the CAO? Because I think there's opportunities there for online public engagement. A lot of municipalities around the world have done public meetings that have been quite contentious, held on the Zoom platform. So if I can ask Councillor Phillips, if you can connect with the CAO to see if we can move this along in terms of at least the public engagement side of it, so we can get this checked off the box and get this. This has been a little bit too long in the hopper, as they say. Thanks, Councillor Phillips, for that. Councillor Dodge.
And what Councillor Phillips has already discussed. And I know that one of the issues that we're having, and I don't know whether the director can deal with this, but it's when we're asking for proof that they're actually Airbnbs, and we're being told that we can't prove it, so we can't kind of enforce anything. Is there something that we can do in the meantime to figure out how we can enforce it, whether we can go online and say, okay, yes, they're advertising this as an Airbnb, and they're in violation of what we have as a short-term rental and stuff like that? Like, is there something that we can do to beef that up so that it's not so easily swept under the table, per se?
So, okay, I'll ask Director Kitay, but we have no report in front of us or anything. So can you please keep your comment as short as possible? And then if there's anything that we can follow up with after to the councillors asking about Airbnbs, I'd like that to take place.
Okay, I tried to keep it as short as I could.
No, I'm talking to Director Kitay.
Okay.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, we continue to investigate every single allegation of a short-term rental in the municipality. The sheer nature of just having a listing on a website such as Airbnb does not prove use of a property as a short-term rental. It shows intent, it doesn't show use. In order for us to be successful at laying a charge in an eventual prosecution, we need to have evidence of use, and that is very difficult to obtain for the reasons that I have shared with council previously, and I don't want to necessarily get into here. The second part to that, of course, is that the courts have been closed for some time now, and even if we were able to obtain any evidence of a use of a short-term rental, we're not even able to file it at this time.
Okay, thank you, Director Kitay. So if there's any other questions, please again reach out to the CAO, and let's see if we can move the ball on this somehow to get this addressed in our community. Councillor Williamson, looks like you're getting attacked by an octopus or something, or a lobster. You got some kind of lobster arms now. You're up.
Support Deleuze lobster.
Yeah, you have your hand up.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. The city of Toronto partially barricaded Lakeshore Boulevard to allow cyclists and pedestrians. I've asked a while back about the possibility of doing something with the Welland Canal. Parkways have been on a number of times when the cyclists go by, and it's not really a prime example of social distancing. So just want to throw that out there again. It may not be doable, or maybe it's something that we could do on the weekends.
That's a great concept. I think it's something that staff should be looking into, because I think as the summer months come, we got to take our lead from what other municipalities have done, and they've looked at those major parkway-esque places, and there's no intrusion on people's houses. Parkway is an excellent example of that up to a certain point. So, Councillor Williamson, if you could put that in writing and send it to the CAO, we can get some further direction on that. Thank you. Okay, I saw someone else. Who else has their hand up? Anybody else? Okay, thank you for, Councillor Littleton.
Point of order, or I don't know what it is, just a point of interest. There is a section of Welland Canals Parkway in Meriton that if you closed it, people could not get to their house.
That's what it is. So that's what the request is.
Just a little FYI on that. Great
Yeah.
idea. Love it. Just maybe that section wouldn't be able to be included. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no further on this, I'll go to bylaws. And we have a reading of bylaws. We have a motion that the bylaws listed on the council agenda A through F be read a first time, considered and passed, and that they be signed and executed by the mayor and the city clerk. Moving the motion to consider and pass the bylaw, I have Councillor Porter. Yes?
Yes, so moved.
And seconded by Councillor Cisco. Okay. Look to the clerk for a recorded vote.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller. Councillor Miller. Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Councillor Harris, are you in the room? Mayor Sensick.
Yes. Okay, ABC.
And that's carried.
Thanks. Sorry, City Clerk. Minutes to receive. We have a motion that council receive and file the minutes of the advisory committees of council as presented. We did have some advisory committee meetings. Moving the motion, I have Councillor Littleton.
Yes, so moved.
And seconded by, who wants to second this?
Okay, I'm just about done.
Councillor Garcia. Thank you.
Yes.
I know you're just about done, so are we, Councillor. Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Okay, carried. We have ABC. So who wants to do so Councillor Dodge, you got an update for AMO?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. I just wanted to reassure everyone that AMO is working closely with the province to make sure that the municipal interests are responded to and heard. And saying that, they're looking at immediate and long-term physical support with the province and also with the feds. And today, for the first time ever, there was a joint letter that went with CUPE to the province to ask for some things to be said. They're working on transit, looking to get money for transit, as well as many other things in regards to COVID. Obviously, COVID has kind of taken over a lot of what their daily work is about, but they're still working on the blue box things, climate change, and just to name a couple things. But yes, they are still working very diligently to make sure the province is there to help us whenever and however they can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge, and thank you for your leadership on the AMO board. Library, does anything else need to be covered under library? Councillor Williamson or Councillor Littleton? You shake your head. No? Okay, perfect. CAO took care of that in her report. Folk arts, Councillor Littleton, do you have any update? No, okay. Airport, Councillor Townsend, is there anything? No one's flying in and out?
It's flying in and out. We are working, no, just to update council, we are working with other secondary airports on a post-COVID-19 strategy. And also just our hearts and thoughts are out with the snowbirds. They did come to the Niagara Airport last year. So just keep them in your thoughts and prayers.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Well said. Councillor Garcia, anything on PAC?
No, Mr. Mayor, I discussed that with Councillor Townsend, and we haven't had any meetings since the last council meeting, so we have no updates.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Councillor Sorrento, for the Downtown Association. Anything?
Nothing yet, Mr. Mayor, but we can get an email out to council at the end of the month.
No problem.
Middle of next month.
Okay. Niagara Wine Festival. Anything, Councillor Phillips, Niagara Wine Festival? You gave us a good update last meeting.
No, other than please support our local wineries. They are very busy with their online and their curb service. They're telling me that business has been brisk because nobody else has anything to do but drink wine, I guess, at home. But that's good. Won't get picked up for DUI, I guess, if you do that. So.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone else have an update? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Garcia, you want to do that? Yeah, he's in. Councillor Cisco, you're second in that. All right. I just want to say thank you to council for all the work that you're doing, and to staff for carrying us through these challenging times. You've done a great job. We've got a little while more to go, but we're all doing this as a team, so it is greatly appreciated. And I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
I's the buy that build the boat.
Yes.
Take care.
Be well, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.